A temporary agreement between the US and China has just been announced, and most people haven't noticed. But if you're living on benefits, what happens in the next 90 days could silently determine whether you'll keep the benefits you currently have or not. Because after this agreement expires, the government will have to choose continue funding benefits or shift the budget to defense and production. And in those choices, people living on SNAP, SSI, SSDI, or Medicaid are always the most vulnerable group. Watch this entire video to understand the 10 potential impacts on your life, even if you don't see any changes right now. If this content touches on something you're worried about, don't forget to like, share with loved ones who are living on benefits, and follow the channel so you don't miss important updates that follow. 1. Prices of goods may become more bearable, but that doesn't mean long-term security. In the context of the US and China reaching a temporary 90-day agreement to reduce tariffs, many people might feel relieved that some imported items could become cheaper. However, for those living on benefits like SSI, SNAP, or fixed pensions, this change doesn't necessarily mean life will become easier. Although some consumer goods may become more bearable in terms of price, essential costs such as rent, electricity, water, and medications remain high. With fixed incomes, benefit recipients don't have the ability to adjust their budgets to deal with these fluctuations. The temporary price reduction of some items is not enough to compensate for essential costs that are increasing or remaining high. Furthermore, the tariff reduction agreement only lasts for 90 days, and there's no guarantee that after this period, tariffs won't be reapplied or even increased. This creates uncertainty and anxiety for those living on benefits, as they cannot predict their living costs in the near future. While financial markets may react positively to this agreement, for those living on benefits, this change doesn't bring direct benefits. They still face daily challenges in meeting their basic needs. Therefore, although the tariff reduction agreement between the US and China may bring some short-term benefits, for those living on benefits, it's not enough to create long-term security. They need more stable support and policies to ensure their daily lives aren't affected by global economic fluctuations. 2. Economic stability returning can make people complacent. When the media begins talking about a truce agreement between the US and China, when financial markets record positive recovery figures, and when some items begin to stabilize in price, the most obvious reaction is a sigh of relief in many people's minds. For those accustomed to worrying about every dollar of their monthly benefits, any sign of stability can bring a sense of hope, even if temporary. But that very feeling, if prolonged without preparation, can lead to complacency. Not because someone is careless, but because when you've lived under pressure for so long, even a little comfort can make you let your guard down. People living on benefits typically have habits of carefully considering every expense. They save every can of food, track the price of each item in the supermarket, and always try to plan ahead. But when the external environment begins to calm down, they tend to allow themselves to suspend vigilance, at least for a few weeks. They may no longer check the SNAP payment schedule as closely as before. They might stop following updates from Medicaid because they think nothing will change anytime soon. And they might slow down in preparing food or stocking up on medications, because of the feeling that things are temporarily okay. But in reality, the lives of people on benefits don't mirror the flow of financial markets. They don't have clear chart lines to follow, but instead, a chain of perceptions about instability. A week with less worry doesn't mean the next month will be less difficult. A full meal today doesn't guarantee that there will still be enough money to buy medicine at the end of the month. And that temporary peace, if not understood for what it truly is, can make people passive when new fluctuations suddenly return. 3. Medication and medical equipment prices are unlikely to decrease, especially for Medicare Medicaid users. While people begin discussing how prices might drop thanks to the trade agreement, there's one reality that remains virtually unchanged: healthcare costs. Those living on benefits, especially the elderly and disabled, understand very clearly that most of what they need to maintain their daily health isn't in the group of goods getting tariff reductions, the prescription pills they have to take regularly. Simple medical devices like blood glucose monitors, hearing aids, wheelchairs, or walking sticks. All still maintain the same prices that were already high. This isn't just a financial burden, but an ongoing worry with each prescription, each follow-up visit. When you live on a fixed income, without the ability to increase it whenever additional expenses arise, buying a box of medication can mean having to cut back on food or postponing a certain bill. And in that context, news about some electronics or consumer goods potentially dropping in price doesn't really bring much change to their actual lives. Because what keeps them up at night isn't whether they can buy a cheaper item or not. It's whether they'll still be able to afford the next prescription their doctor wrote or next month. If they need to replace the batteries in their hearing aid, where will the money come from? Health doesn't wait for people to have the financial means. And that's what forces people living on benefits to always live in a state of choosing what's more important. Meals can be reduced by a few items. The electricity bill can be delayed, but medication can't wait. An interrupted prescription isn't just an inconvenience. It can lead to a chain of more serious health problems, increasing costs, time, and feelings of helplessness. 4. Risk of benefit budget cuts if the agreement isn't extended. No one can predict with certainty what will happen after 90 days. The nature of a short-term agreement always comes with the possibility of change. And what makes many people feel anxious isn't in the current numbers, but in the question if after 3 months, the situation becomes tense again. What will be adjusted? Because people living on benefits don't usually think about global trade as a grand concept, but they feel very clearly the consequences of each budget adjustment. They know that whenever the government needs to reallocate spending, programs like SNAP, SSI, or Medicaid might be put on the scale, not because anyone wants to cut them, but because they constitute a large portion of the annual support budget. And with a system that's already at its limit, even a small change can create a big impact on millions of people. For many, this isn't just a hypothesis anymore. They've seen SNAP limits adjusted. They've received letters stating that their files need to be reviewed, even though their health condition hasn't changed. And they've also heard the phrase, "We're reviewing the budget," as a signal that something will be reduced in the near future. 5. Increasing unemployment if cheap imports hurt domestic production. When a temporary trade agreement allows Chinese imports into the market, the first thing people usually think about is the benefit to consumers. But for domestic production, this sometimes means a quiet challenge. Businesses that were already operating at minimum capacity might lose what little competitive edge they had left. And once purchasing power shifts toward cheaper goods from abroad, layoffs become difficult to avoid. People living on benefits may not work in those factories. They aren't the ones directly losing their jobs, but they live in the same society, the same support system. When the number of unemployed increases, benefit applications increase as well, and that puts greater pressure on the very programs they depend on every day like SSDI, Medicaid, or food assistance. They begin to notice very small but clear signs: longer processing times for applications, support lines that are harder to connect with, and sometimes news from friends or neighbors, someone who was just asked to submit additional paperwork, someone who just had their payment delayed. No one says it out loud, but deep down, everyone understands that when the system is overloaded, the stability they currently have also becomes more fragile. They don't blame others for applying. They understand everyone needs support when they lose their job. But they can't help worrying if the number of people needing help keeps increasing like this. Then, at some point, will their own portion get smaller? It's not a direct concern, but because it's indirect, it lingers, seeping into every choice, every small daily consideration of people living on benefits. 6. Benefit application reviews may tighten if the system is under high load. When the economy shows signs of instability or the job market risks contracting. What no one puts into words but everyone can feel is that a wave of new benefit applications might begin to form. People living on SSI, SSDI, or SNAP may not be the first to feel the impact, but they know that once many people fall into difficult circumstances at the same time, the system will have to bear more, faster, and deeper than usual. During such periods, all procedures seem to slow down. A review letter that normally arrives in 3 weeks might now take a month. A call that needs resolution only gets a response after multiple waits. And then, familiar things begin to change. More paperwork needs to be resubmitted. More verification calls. Some files are held back because they need additional condition reviews. People living on benefits are usually accustomed to proceeding cautiously, one step at a time. Not everyone has someone to help with paperwork. Not everyone has the health to run back and forth submitting documents again. And when those who need support the most have to wait longer, have to prove more, fatigue gradually replaces hope. No one speaks up in protest. But that silence doesn't mean there isn't distress. It just means people are trying to endure, because there's no other choice. 7. Elderly, disabled people easily miss important information due to lack of accessibility support. For many people living on benefits, getting accurate information isn't always easy. News about a trade agreement between two countries might appear on television, online news, or economic bulletins. But not everyone has the means to access those sources every day. And while negotiations take place far away, in large meeting rooms, the subtle changes underneath can seep into every form, every eligibility condition, every number in monthly benefit files, things that directly affect their lives. Elderly people sometimes don't use the internet regularly. Disabled people may not easily read through a policy update several pages long. Some people have no one beside them to help check emails, no smartphone to receive notifications, and no longer have the strength to stand in line at the benefits office just to ask a small question. And because of this, they easily miss out. Not because they don't care, but because their pace of life is inherently slower than the pace of change in society. They're often the ones who only know they've been affected when a letter arrives late, an application is rejected, or a payment doesn't appear on the usual day like every month. The lack of information doesn't just make them reactive, it makes them feel alienated. The feeling of standing outside a spinning wheel where everyone else already knows what to do, while they're still fumbling to understand what's happening. And when support doesn't arrive in time, they worry not just about benefits, but that they might be left behind and lose the very benefits they currently have. 8. Local support programs may be indirectly affected for many people living on benefits. The money they receive each month isn't their only means of survival. Besides SSI, SSDI, or SNAP, They also rely on essential state-level support such as affordable housing programs, utility bill assistance, or winter heating and community health care packages. These supports may not be large, but in a life maintained by frugality, any amount carries vital significance. However, not everyone realizes that many of these state-level programs operate with federal funding. When the federal budget has to rebalance due to economic fluctuations after a trade agreement, whether successful or failed, local programs can absolutely be affected. Not cut immediately, but possibly delayed. Not shut down, but potentially limiting the number of people who can be helped. For those involved, they don't need to hear terms like federal budget reallocation. They just feel that this month's electricity subsidy didn't arrive on time, or the winter gas vouchers aren't the same as last year, or the waiting list for affordable housing keeps getting longer with no concrete appointments in sight. And that silence is what makes them feel powerless. No one says their benefits have been cut, but they know that what they used to rely on is no longer certain. 9. Lack of policy consistency creates prolonged psychological instability. Not all changes are bad, but when change happens continuously, without clear patterns, without specific explanations, even good things can become sources of anxiety. People living on benefits understand this better than anyone. They don't need policies to prioritize them all the time. They just need to know in advance to prepare. But when policies keep changing from one quarter to the next, today it's news about tax reductions. Tomorrow it's news about the budget. Next week it's news about new SNAP conditions. Then psychological stability gradually erodes. Not knowing what will change next makes many people afraid to make long-term plans. They're hesitant to shop ahead, hesitant to schedule routine medical checkups, hesitant to even think about basic needs like car repairs, changing glasses, or buying supplementary medications. Not because they don't need these things, but because they fear next month's money won't be enough if something suddenly changes. The confusion doesn't come from losing benefits immediately. It comes from the feeling that everything could change at any moment, and they no longer have the energy to adapt quickly enough. That's when people gradually lose faith, not because the system doesn't help, but because the system helps in a way that's no longer predictable. When living on a fixed income, what's most important isn't just how much the amount is, but the ability to know in advance, calculate ahead, and control the near future. And if change keeps coming abruptly like this, then even if benefits haven't been cut, many people feel they no longer have the same grip on their lives as before. 10. Impact on public spending policy. The temporary agreement between the U.S. and China has given the government more time to maintain stability in certain expenditures. During this time, benefit policies such as Medicaid, SNAP, or housing assistance haven't yet seen clear impacts. But this is just a brief pause. After 90 days, if negotiations don't reach a sustainable result, the government will be forced to make choices. Either increase investment in defense and domestic production to be more self-sufficient in the supply chain, or cut spending in areas that are easier to adjust. And historically, Social Security programs have always been among the first options considered. People living on benefits don't necessarily need to understand all the government's fiscal calculations. They care about one thing: if there's a change in how the budget is allocated, how will that affect them? And that waiting, that uncertainty, prevents them from feeling secure. Not because changes have occurred, but because there's a very real possibility that changes will come. No one hopes for bad things to happen, but in a world that changes too quickly, especially for those living on benefits, Understanding the context and preparing in advance is always the best way to protect oneself. Whether it's a small change in prices, procedures, or the federal budget, all can leave lasting impacts on real lives that not everyone recognizes from the beginning. If you find this content helpful, don't forget to like to support the channel, share with relatives or friends who receive benefits so they aren't left behind, and subscribe to follow important updates that follow. Thank you for taking the time to watch. See you in the next video, where we'll continue to clarify what's happening and, more importantly, what it means for your life.